How's it going? So today we're going to be looking at the Unit 1 for AP Psychology, which is the biological viewpoints. We're going to make this a three-part kind of section for Unit 1 as there's three major categories. The first one being the biological viewpoints, the second one being sleep as well as altered states, and the third one will be specifically the drug categories, so stimulants, depressants, and hallucinogenics. Today, though, we're just going to focus on the biological aspect. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the idea of the great debate between nature versus nurture. So this debate basically looks at how much of who we are as a person is influenced by our genetics, our pre-programmed nature, or the experiences that we have in life that influence us based on an environment, which is nurture. Now, there are some specific things. So genetics, when it comes to eye color, height, and athleticism, that is more leaning towards the nature side. So genes are a major factor. But the environment also has a heavy influence on certain things, such as our music taste, language, faith, and our diet. But in reality, many things in our life is a mix of both. Now, some things like diseases, we can have, predetermined kind of traits and genes that can make us more susceptible to something. But there might be an environmental factor that needs to trigger those genes. So this just kind of shows us that, typically it's a layered kind of thing where nature and nurture kind of intertwine together. But there are some things that are specific nature and specific nurture. Now, for AP Psychology, you need to know what eugenics are. This was an unethical movement to focus on things such as controlling reproduction and promoting certain genes in the environment of the population and attacking other traits. So examples of this where they were trying to control certain types of genes when it comes to a population would be things like the Nazi Holocaust, for example, during World War II. Something you need to know for the exam that might pop on there a few times. So just something to kind of have in your notes for that. Now, twin studies kind of focus more on that nature versus nurture. And it's important because when we look at these long-term studies, we can see what is influencing the twins more. Is it more of a genetic thing for identical twins, or are we seeing something more of an experience with our environment, more fraternal twins? So going back to this term longitudinal study, it just means that we focus on the long-term changes of the twins' characteristics for this. So we're focused on following these twins throughout life to see what type of changes happen with their characteristics. Two terms you do need to know is monozygotic twins, which are identical twins, and we also have dizygotic twins, which are fraternal twins. Now the difference between these two is monozygotic are identical. Their DNA is 100% the same. We can definitely see changes in their genetics on the nature side of this argument. Now, fraternal twins, it's more 50%, so we can kind of look at nature and nurture in that aspect. But monozygotic, these identical twins, we can really pinpoint to see if something is purely genetic, which both of them should or should not have something, for example, or if the environment plays a factor. All right. Now, we have to talk about Darwinism, so this talks about natural selection, the idea that strong traits help a creature or a species survive, where weaker ones will cause them to perish and die off. So there's this idea, for example, of the finches of the Galapagos Islands and how the typical food source became more harder to eat. These types of fruit had a harder exterior shell, and birds with weaker beaks were unable to crack it open and they would die off. Now, for different types of birds, for example, they have stronger beaks that can break through that shell. They were able to thrive and begin to kind of populate the island and expand into one of the dominant species of it. Now, this just shows us that a specific trait can either make or break a species. So there's different things such as camouflage for an octopus, speed for a cheetah, a bull shark being able to swim in fresh and salt water. These are specific things that help certain species survive for a long period of time. I mean, think about, for example, like alligators and crocodiles, one of the oldest types of reptiles that we know and we can see today, going all the way back to the dinosaur periods, etc. Their ability to have kind of a thick hide kind of body that protects them from damage, their ability to swim through water and camouflage is a reason why they've been around for so long. Now, evolutionary perspective is the idea that some of our traits may have evolved because of our ancestors trying to adapt. Things like phobias of spiders, or the dislikement of bitter taste. These are things that might have gone from our ancestors decades or centuries ago. For example, spider phobias could be because dangerous spiders back, in the past were a threat to our ancestors. The bitterness taste of different foods might remind us of different poisonous leaves and vegetables and fruit in the kind of natural environment back in the past. So that's kind of the evolutionary perspective, is certain traits and things that make us who we are evolved from decades and centuries of our ancestors adapting and adjusting these traits to get us where we are today. All right, moving on now, we're going to be looking at the nervous system. So the nervous system sends signals back and forth throughout the body, these electrochemical signals. And there's two major overarching types that you need to know, which is the central nervous system, CNS, and the peripheral nervous system, PNS. Here's the difference. The CNS is the busiest. It makes up of just two specific things, your brain and your spinal cord. It kind of looks like a lollipop, easy way to remember that for the exam. And it's the busiest system. Almost all signals go through your brain and spine, whether it's going from your sensors to your brain or towards your muscles. This is like the highway of the body. Now, peripheral nervous systems is less busy. It's almost like the side streets. You use, for example, your arms and legs throughout the day, but they don't get as much heavy signal usage. So if you look at this diagram, all of these purple kind of extending, see how they flash here, types of nerves is our peripheral nervous system. Now, as we look more specifically and we start diving into the nervous system and its functions, there's other types of categories that come up. Somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. The difference here is somatic is all of our voluntary movements and functions. Things like raising our hand, climbing a ladder, kicking a soccer ball, anything that we have to actually try to do is our somatic nervous system. Where the autonomic nervous system is a lot of our automatic movements and functions that we don't have to think about 24/7. Things like breathing, heart rate, sweating, and metabolism. These are all things that we do and involve movements, but we don't have to think about every breath that we take, or every move that we make when it comes to our heart rates, sweating, etc. Now, as we dive deeper into these automatic functions, there are two specific ways that it fires. It could be sympathetic, which means our nervous system is ramped up and increasing. Think of when you're either excited or scared, your breathing increases, your heart rate increases, you sweat. And we also have parasympathetic, which is the opposite. We relax and our nervous system lowers signals. Our breathing's relaxed, our heart rate drops, and we're hungry. Easy way to remember this. S for sympathetic for stress. Parasympathetic, P for peace. Easy way to kind of understand the different type of symptoms you may experience. This is kind of an image to kind of show you. So our nervous system has a central nervous system here that has a brain and a spinal cord. Going off here is our peripheral nervous system, and it can either be somatic or autonomic. Somatic is voluntary functions, autonomic is our auto ones. And that can either be super ramped up sympathetically, increasing, or relaxed parasympathetically. Now, when we talk on the kind of microscopic level of the nervous system, we cannot stop without talking about neurons, which are the building blocks of this nervous system. And they're made of specific parts. If you look over here towards the right side, this snowflake kind of part to the left is where it receives a signal. This is the dendrite. You also have the cell body, which is the soma. This long strip here, which is called the axon, and the exit, the departer of the different types of signals, which is the terminal button. Easy way to kind of remember that and look at that. These make up our entire nervous system. Signals go back and forth throughout the body through this. Now, there's three major types. Sensory, which is when we send signals from our body and sends it up to the brain to be processed. Then we have motor neurons, which is when we take signals from our brain and shoot them back down to our muscles to move. Think of the motor of a car, for example. And then interneurons. This is kind of like the glue that connects the two together. So in the spine, interneurons kind of connect these signals back and forth so they can go different directions. Those are the three major types. We also have reflex arc, which is that simple, automatic, quick nervous system reflex. So moving your hand off the stove, this quick reflex is something that our body is pre-programmed to have. And we cannot forget about our favorite things, the glial cells. They keep the entire nervous systems and cells clean from waste. They help support them with nutrients, etc. They keep the neuron cells alive. Look at them as like the janitors. They make sure everything functions as it should, and without them, everything would fall apart. Think of the G of glial cells as garbage, because that's what they do. They clean up the waste. This kind of shows you that signal going from the dendrite to the cell body, through that axon, and out that terminal area towards the right. Now, there are different processes when it comes to messages being sent. First things first, the neuron sits there at resting potential. That means it's kind of just vibing with a negative charge, waiting to be activated. When a signal begins to go there, it begins to polarize this neuron. And what happens is that signal changes from a negative to a positive thanks to these sodium ions ramping the signal up. This kind of signal itself begins to swell, and this is the all or nothing response. It begins to build, 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 and it has to hit a threshold to fire. If it doesn't hit that threshold, it's not going to fire at all this signal. But if it does hit the threshold, it fully sends the signal. There is no half signal or partial signal. All or nothing simply states the neurons either fire or they don't. And when they do fire, we call that action potential. The neuron finally hits that threshold or frequency and fires the signal across to be sent to the next one. After the signal is sent, it needs to relax and recover. That's the refractory period, where it kind of just chills out, begins to rest and heal, and begin to get ready for another signal. And then reuptake happens. Reuptake is when we are resting and kind of chillaxing after we shot our signal across. Now we're kind of collecting all of our small chemicals that we shot over so we can kind of reload for that next action. So these kind of, we'll call them ammunition or chemicals that are kind of shot across, are called neurotransmitters. These are chemicals that, if you kind of look over here, look like these small little balls that shoot across from the buttons towards the dendrites of two different neurons. Now, after we send them across, we do have to recollect them, which is called reuptake. Because if we don't do that, we'll lose all of these chemical receptors and these neurotransmitters, and we won't be able to send signals back and forth like this. This is important, for example, for chemical neurotransmitters like serotonin. Serotonin is extremely important for mood stabilization, and if we don't have that kind of flowing through our neurons, we will have imbalances when it comes to our mood. Now, a couple different disorders that we need to know about with the nervous system is multiple sclerosis, MS, which is a disorder where the body begins to attack itself in the central nervous system, and it can cause major issues with balance as well as pain and inflammation. Now, Graves' disease, MG over here on the screen, is a disorder where we have something similar, but instead of attacking the central nervous system, we have antibodies attacking the body and causing muscle weakness. So instead of the balance and pain issues, we have weakness in our muscles. Now, enough about the nervous system for right now. We have the endocrine system, and that's the one that controls our hormones, things that are secreted in the body and changes our emotions and perceptions. Things, for example, like adrenaline, which controls kind of our ramped upness of energy. Oxytocin, the love hormone, things like that. Now, going back to neurotransmitters real quick, they could either be excitatory, which means they increase the chance of action potential, or inhibitory, which means they lower the chance of action potential. You can look at these two different types of neurons over here towards the right. This quick signal being sent down, down, down at this moment is excitatory. It's fast, it's quick, and it's sending signals at a pretty fast rate. Where here towards the left, this slow gravitating signal is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. It is very slow and relaxed. Easy thing that we have to remember all the different types of neurotransmitters of the body. We have dopamine, which kind of helps with things like movement, pain, attention, rewards, and pleasures. The issue with this is too little can cause Parkinson's, too much can cause schizophrenia, and it's also extremely addictive. Think of it like dope. It's something where, like, once you win a jackpot gambling, you're going to always want to keep gambling. You're going to want to chase this kind of feeling of excitement. Serotonin's similar. It kind of controls our mood, hunger, and sleep. And it's something that with too little causes anxiety and depression. Too much can cause a serotonin syndrome, which is basically an overdose of serotonin, which can kind of shock the body. Norepinephrine, this is an alert one that focuses on the fight or flight response. Too little will make us depressed because we don't have that alertness. But too much can cause extreme stress and anxiety. Glutamate's the next one on here. This one's memory and learning. Too much can cause things like migraines and seizures, for example. GABA is one that calms us down and relaxes us. Substance P controls our pain signals that are sent throughout the nervous system. Endorphins help us with memory, attention, as well as our muscles. And glutamate helps us also with memory and learning. Going to the brain parts, we have 4 major lobes, but first you need to know what the cerebral cortex is. This is the outer layer of the brain that's made up of 4 different lobes. The 4 lobes are as follow. We have the frontal lobe, which controls maturity, impulse control, decision-making, and movements. This is the last part of the brain to develop. It's all of our kind of common sense and impulse control, as well as growing up and being mature. Parietal lobe is the next one that controls our sensation of touch, understanding where things are spatially, spatial awareness, and our perception and understanding of the world around us. The temporal lobe, which is located right by our temples, controls our hearing, language, memory, and our ability to recognize things like faces and objects. It kind of gives us our perception of the world and understanding, but also helps us with hearing and language and our memory. So damage to this can cause memory issues, for example. And our occipital lobe, which is the one at the back of the head, which is the easiest, controls our ability to see and recognize shapes, color, and movements. So if we look over here at the top right, we have the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, we have the occipital lobe, and we have the temporal lobe. To talk about this when it comes to breaking up the brain into halves, we have this idea called hemispheric specialization, which means that each side of the brain specializes more in certain tasks. Now, that doesn't mean that you can be a left or right brain person or that all math is in the left side of the brain, but we tend to see a concentration or increase of these types of skills in certain halves of the brain. The left hemisphere focuses more on the logic and math, and the right more on creativity. But we do see these things on both sides of the brain, but this is where they tend to lean when it comes to the concentration of these skills. Contralateral hemispheric organization. Super long words, I know, but it's very easy when it comes to the explanation. This just means that each brain half controls the opposite side of the body. The left side of your brain controls your right arm, your right leg, all that stuff, your right eye, and vice versa. The right side of your brain controls your left arm, left leg, and left eye. So basically, if you slice your body in half, the left side of your brain controls the right side of your body, the right side of your brain controls the left. You need to know about split brain patients, for example. So these are individuals with epilepsy who had their corpus callosum cut off and kind of cut through, which means that they have two brains, a left and a right in a sense. Just know for this one that it causes some issues, especially if we're looking out of one eye. Those are some things that kind of change some of our abilities when it comes to things that we can function with. For example, if we look out of our right eye, we can say things, but we can't really draw or kind of reach out and touch them. Vice versa, with our left eye, we're able to draw things and touch them, but we can't say the name of a certain object. Just kind of shows us that our brains are meant to work together. When they're split, it causes these abnormalities. Here are some brain parts that we need to know. The brainstem connects the brain and spine together. So for example, easy to remember this is B for brain, S for spine. So it kind of connects the body together at this time. The medulla controls our breathing and heartbeats. Think of meditation for medulla. The reticular formation, or also called the reticular activating system, controls our alertness and arousal and attention. Think of R for ready. This is the thing that kind of locks you in. Cerebellum controls our voluntary movements, balance, and motor learning. So for individuals who have, for example, MS, they might have issues with their cerebellum. It's also called a little brain because if you look at this image, it's kind of found in the back of the head, and it looks like a tiny little brain back there. And then we have the limbic system, which is in the middle of the brain, and it controls most of our emotions, our reward systems, and addiction. Going to that corpus callosum, that's what we were talking about earlier. Basically, it connects the two halves of the brain together. Think of C for connecting. And then we also have a motor cortex, which controls movements, and somatosensory cortex, which controls sensation and touch. Don't get confused by these. Think of motor like an engine for movements. And then ignore somato, just look at sensory cortex. It's the part of our brain that focuses on our sensations, things like touch examples. Hypothalamus regulates the body's eat, sleep, sex, as well as temperature. Think of without it, you might get hypothermia, for example, because you don't have a balance in the body. Thalamus controls touch as well as travel, so it controls our sensation signals of touch as well as sending all of our signals to the right areas. And then we have the hippocampus. This focuses on things like learning and our memories. Think of a hippo who is studying on a college campus. They're learning and having the best memories of their life. Easy way to remember that for the exam. Your amygdala controls anger. Think of A for aggression or A for anger. This is the part that has that fight or flight response to the body. The pituitary gland is also the master gland of the body. It controls growth, stress, and also is controlled by the thalamus. This is basically the endocrine gland that controls most things going on hormonally inside the body. Now, easy to remember this is P for principal. Principals inside of a school are in charge. They check for growth and they kind of make sure everything is going well. Same way the pituitary gland does also. Now, when it comes to the ability to speak and understand language, we have the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area. The Broca's area controls our ability to speak. Without it, you don't have a voice. Think of B for Broca voice or B for Boca mouth. So without this part of the brain, you wouldn't be able to speak. Wernicke's area controls our ability to understand language. So without it, we can't understand what other people are saying to us, and we can't speak in a meaningful ability when it comes to our language. Now, overall, if any of these parts, these areas, we'll call them, are damaged, we'll get what's called aphasia, which is just the clinical term for the inability to speak and or understand speech. So typically, if you have aphasia, one of these areas have been damaged. Now we're going to talk really quickly about medical information when it comes to the brain and different types of scans. So first things first, if our brain has any trauma or cuts, we call these lesions, these small pieces of damage on the skull and on the brain that can cause issues with different brain parts, for example. Think of the L in lesions for little cuts. So depending on where these cuts are, if they're on the occipital lobe, it can cause vision issues. As we talked about the hippocampus controlling our memories, if we have a lesion there, we'd have issues with our memories. If we have a lesion on our medulla, we could potentially die, which is something to always consider as a threatening thing with different types of disorders that cause lesions. But luckily, our brain has a lot of ability to rewire and fix itself. This is called brain plasticity. So brain plasticity is the idea that our brain can fix itself during trauma or damage, and it's best when we're young. Our brain is super kind of flexible when we're at a young age, but when we get older, it begins more difficult to repair. Think of it like Play-Doh. When you open up a new thing of Play-Doh, you can move it, shape it, and mold it. That's like when you're young with your brain. But as you get older, it's like leaving that Play-Doh out overnight, day after day after day. It becomes rock solid and harder to move. Just like our brain, it's harder for us to repair it the older that we get. Now for scans, you need to know 4 for the AP exam. EEGs look at the electric brain activity. We look at these small little waves and see what parts of the brain are using the most electric activity. We look at this with sleep studies and with epilepsy. Think of the E in EEG as electric. PET scans focus on things like what parts of the brain are using the most energy during certain tasks. Energy for PET scans being sugar and glucose. So we're seeing what parts of the brain are consuming the most energy, which means putting in the most work, during certain tasks that we're doing, whether it's like a puzzle or reading or running, for example. Think of the P for pancakes. When you eat pancakes in the morning, there's syrup and it's energizing and full of sugar, for example. Kind of similar to a PET scan. CT scans look at x-rays of the brain to see if there's concussions, lesions, or damage. Think of the C in CT scan as concussion. We're trying to see if there's any type of trauma or impact on the brain or skull. fMRI looks at magnets to detect different things like our blood flow and oxygen in the brain, to look for different things such as tumors, damage, trauma, etc. These are all tools that are used in the medical field to help us look at the neurons and the brain as a whole. And that's it for this entire video. So hopefully that helped you with the medical side of biological perspectives and the Unit 1 biology. Our next one's going to be focused more on the specifics of dreams and sleep disorders. And then our third one for this unit is going to focus on drugs and drug categories. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully this helped you with the unit and getting prepared for the exam. Have a good one.